This is why people hate the One Punch Man manga right now, at least according to a very vocal minority in the One Punch Man fanbase. And honestly, a lot of these complaints have been getting louder by the day since the end of the Monster Association arc, which makes sense since although there's still plenty of action and story development with each new chapter, the stakes currently aren't nearly as high as in the Monster Association arc, primarily because we're still in the very early phases of the next major one, that being the Neo Heroes arc. So as the saying goes, in times of peace, people are preparing for war with their One Punch Man complaints and takes. And I'll admit, some of those points that we'll be talking about in today's video are pretty valid to a certain extent, and I found myself agreeing with some of them even as a huge fan of the series myself. So I think you might be convinced yourself on some of them by the end of this video. Now, I'm just gonna say right now, right at the top, even if I agree with some of these complaints to an extent, I'm still a die-hard fan of bald heroes. So much so that I fall asleep to One Punch Man playing on my TV in the background every night, with the poster of Dom Toretto hanging right over my bed and a Caillou plushie as my pillow, and maybe a Krillin figurine watching the door in front of me protecting me while I sleep. You get the point. So with that being said, let's get into it. One major complaint I see a lot is how the power scaling of the series is completely out of whack compared to the webcomic. And to be honest, most of these complaints are from OG webcomic readers, so just keep that in mind. Now, when I say the phrase power scaling, many of you probably get PTSD episodes of someone spamming "he can't be Goku though" in the comment section of most anime videos.
Nobody could be Goku!
But there is kind of a valid point to this. The One Punch Man manga seems to more heavily emphasize the dramatic power-ups during fights, and just generally makes characters in the series way stronger than they originally were in the webcomic, to the point that you can make the argument that many of the characters in the manga would be considered god-level threats easily by the webcomic standards.
Let him
Webcomic comparisons aside, it does seem like the manga really wanted to emphasize the cool powers and explosions in general. And I mean, it's kind of for good reason. Murata is obviously a way better artist than One is, and his incredible art is put on full display in many of the jaw-dropping scenes and double spreads that he draws during fights and action scenes. So you can make the argument that it's for the better, just depending on what you prefer. But a perfect example of power scaling going completely out of whack is with Sairochi during the Monster Association arc of the manga. After the merger of Psychos and Monster King Orochi, they unveiled their new insane power by literally slicing off a massive portion of the Earth's crust, like it was just another day at the office or something. It was pretty much just one massive, super exaggerated flex. It looked amazing on the page, don't get me wrong, but it was probably the first time I really sat back and was like, wow, this is all on a much larger scale than the webcomic ever was. And normally people would appreciate bigger feats of power and more insane action sequences in a battle manga, but One Punch Man is a unique exception with a lot of people. This is because the inception of One Punch Man as a webcomic revolved around poking fun at a lot of these tropes, like massive explosions and big power-ups, and a lot of other hero tropes where the good guy perseveres over evil, using sheer willpower and leveling up mid-fight in an epic way to finish off the big bad. One Punch Man, on the other hand, revolves around Saitama, a guy that's already absolutely strong, stronger than anybody ever will be, and can handle any problem with a single punch. So with that in mind, some people argue that the manga version is starting to feed into a lot of the stereotypical hero tropes instead of poking fun at them, which defeats the purpose of the story in general. One moment in particular that I think solidified the fact that power scaling in One Punch Man had gotten to Dragon Ball levels of kooky was during Saitama's epic fight with Garo in the Monster Association arc. Want an example of this? Well, you know, take your pick. Maybe it's the time that Garo hit Saitama into the ground so hard that it freaking bulged the other side of the planet, or how in his Cosmic Fear form, he was capable of essentially exterminating all life on Earth just by standing there with his cosmic radiation. Or hey, how about the time that Saitama literally sneezed off the surface of Jupiter and used his own farts as a lightspeed jet to make it back to Earth with Garo? That fart scene in particular is what had some people feeling like Saitama's feats of power were just being used as a gimmick and were getting way too cringy and out of hand. Many people found themselves rolling their eyes at that moment, and I don't blame you. It's super out of pocket looking back on it, but I don't know, I thought it was pretty funny at the time, so I didn't really care. But speaking of Garo, probably one of the biggest characters of contention in the entire series isn't even the main character Saitama, but the fan favorite character Garo. Those that have read the webcomic before picking up the manga usually tend to have the same complaint when it comes to Garo as a character. This being that the manga version of Garo is much less jaded and violent than he was in the webcomic. In the original version of the story, Garo was brutal, ruthless, and unrelenting with his pursuit of becoming the absolute evil. A prime example many people with this complaint about Garo's manga version would point to is his encounter with the S-Class in the webcomic. There he brutalizes all of them physically and mentally, completely shitting on their pathetic attempts at beating him. Not only does he straight up cave Amai masked face in, which mind you, Garo likely didn't know or care at the time that Amai could regenerate from that kind of damage, so to him he was essentially going for a kill with that punch. He also absolutely tore Zombie Man to shreds and threatened to kill Terrio if no one could stop him. Terrio being the weird looking kid that was pretty much Garo's sidekick throughout the entire arc. That's where I think the major difference is really emphasized with webcomic Garo and his manga counterpart. In one version, he was completely serious about killing a child to prove his point that he'd become a true monster, and in the other version, he refused to do so even after transforming, and even sobbed at the realization that he had accidentally killed Terrio with his radiation. The goal with Garo's manga version clearly seemed to be to keep him as redeemable as possible and change him from the anti-villain that he was in the webcomic into an anti-hero in the manga, essentially watering him down in many people's eyes. But I mean, I for one enjoy the fact that the manga gave us more emotional moments with Garo, even if it came at the expense of his more brutal personality, because it gave him a little more depth as a character in my opinion. But I do understand why some people think that he became more shonen tropey because of it. One thing I will say though is that you could make the argument that they watered down or generalized a lot of other characters in the series compared to their webcomic counterparts. A prime example of this is actually Saitama. In his more poorly drawn version, he was much more blunt and straightforward, to the point that you could even call him cold-hearted at times. The prime example of this to me is when he fought Garo, and after his final monster transformation, Saitama proceeded to thoroughly embarrass him and took a big ol' shit on his dreams of becoming the absolute evil. It all starts when he tells Garo that the fight is already over because he's running on fumes now, and slaps him around a little bit to prove his point. He even flat out tells him that this is the end and any more fighting would be meaningless. As Garo refuses to quit and starts spitting out more angry ideals, Saitama just straight up punches him and tells him to shut the F up already. In their fight in this version, he essentially calls Garo a fraud that wanted to be a hero and settled on becoming a monster because it was easier, while in the manga version, it was more so Saitama emphasizing how Garo is really a hero pretending to be a monster. A lot more lighthearted. At some point, he even taunts Garo and delivers one of the coldest lines I've ever read in a story. He goes on to say, "To bring about world peace, you took the easy route, thinking a monster's job was quicker and easier than a hero's. A monster's role is simple after all. All you had to do was defeat heroes. It's perfect for someone with no confidence like you, but you can never defeat me." Like just point blank, completely shitting on his dreams right there and then. Pretty much calling him a fool for ever having them in the first place. Sure, you could argue that he showed similar savagery when they were on the moon Io, since he was still pissed over Genos' death, but I don't think that it ever really reached the level of savage that it did in the webcomic with Saitama, and you could clearly see that at other points in the story as well, I think. Some people also say that Saitama's just generally more preachy, with a lot more stereotypical manga hero moments, where he shows a villain or a misguided hero the error of their ways, instead of just beating the shit out of them like he does in the webcomic. In the manga, Saitama definitely does seem more like a shining beacon of the ideal hero, with a more clear moral compass, while in his original version, he's much more grounded in the way that he goes about being the ideal hero and is more so just a hero for fun, as he states all the time. You could argue that there's more fluff in the manga version of his character, like there is in the manga version of the story in general. A big complaint from people during the Monster Association arc in particular is that we were spending way too much time developing characters that were either uninteresting or just flat out unimportant to the main plot. For example, all the time that we spent with Atomic Samurai's disciples and the Private military group got pretty annoying at some point, especially since it was smack dab in the middle of all the awesome action happening everywhere else. Where I would push back on that though is in situations like the Surface Hero team that was added to the manga, referring to the newly introduced heroes like Captain Mizuki, Gearspur, and Needlestar. I really enjoyed their presence in the manga and their influence on the story in general. I think a major strength of One is being able to create tons of interesting and unique characters and then meshing them together in a meaningful way that makes sense for the story. Sure, it might make it so we get derailed from the main plot to spend time with other minor characters, but that's part of what makes the series so enjoyable for me personally. I generally enjoy getting to meet new characters and spending time with them because it deepens the story for me and makes for much richer world building. So one particular complaint that I see from fans a lot that I actually agree with the most probably is that there's infinitely more fan service in the manga than I originally thought there would be. Look, I've been a manga and anime enjoyer for long enough to know that fan service with spicy looking anime women is a pillar of a successful franchise. The industry knows that the majority of their audience is horny men and they give them what they want. The problem is that I felt that the story of One Punch Man would subvert these expectations more than it has, and on the contrary, it's been leaned into a lot, especially lately with characters like Fubuki and Tatsumaki. I mean, Mosquito Girl was even brought back recently, and I am almost 100% positive that it's mostly to add some more material for spicy panels. In a lot of instances in the story, it almost seems like Murata goes out of his way to make things more fan servicey than they really need to be. For example, when Captain Mizuki was introduced, one of her main scenes was literally smashing watermelon monsters with her thighs and being shown covered in all the juices. I mean, come on, that's blatant fan service if I've ever seen it. Another is when Fubuki quickly defeats Psychos and caught her in probably the most provocative way possible, or at least that's how it's drawn. Psychos and Fubuki's relationship in general has been played up to the point that it's become a straight up ship. And let me tell you a little something about me that you might not know. I absolutely hate ships and the toxicity it brings to a series. I mean, just look at how MHA fans literally threatened Horikoshi's life for not pushing their weird ships for literal teenagers. Like, this stuff gets out of hand sometimes. Maybe not so much with One Punch Man right now, but with a lot of other series you can clearly see that. Look, if you're a ship enthusiast and that's one of your main selling points for enjoying a manga or anime, that's totally fine. Do you, my friend. I don't want to poo-poo on your parade, but it's just an aspect that I find particularly annoying with One Punch Man. My major gripe with shipping in One Punch Man is that it's turning strong and deep characters like Tatsumaki and Fubuki into one-dimensional gimmicks for the sake of forcing a love triangle between them and Saitama. Like, it doesn't even make sense. Saitama clearly doesn't like either of them, has never shown any interest in either of them, but it just keeps getting played upon in the manga endlessly with every interaction Tatsumaki has with Saitama. Now, I'm not gonna blame Murata for the crazy shipping that the fans have, so maybe this is just a fan base problem, you know, but whatever. It's not in every case, but like I said, I really enjoy how deep and interesting of characters that Tatsumaki and Fubuki have become, especially with the more fleshed out backstory that they've both had in the manga, so I just don't want to see it get ruined by people obsessing over ships and weird stuff like that. But like I said at the top, many of these complaints do not take away from my experience of enjoying the story at all. It's more so just little gripes that I've kind of agreed with some of the fan base. A lot of other people are definitely making these complaints a lot bigger of a deal than they need to be, but that's all in your right as a manga and anime enjoyer, right? Everyone's entitled to their own opinions and I'm not going to argue with them. Let me know your opinions though in the comments below. Let me know if you agree with any of these complaints that some fans have had. Maybe some of you share some of these minor gripes with the story currently. Don't be shy, share your thoughts in the comments below. That's it for this one though. Have an absolutely wonderful night, morning, afternoon, whatever, and I'll see you guys in the next video.